Hi, and welcome to the latest session of Tech Insights. My name is Shelly Calhoun-Jones, and I'm a principal technologist at Cohesity. Today, we're joined with Nick from Tenable. Nick, would you like to do an introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Shelly. I'm Nick Keuning. I'm the Senior Director of Solution Architecture here at Tenable for the Tech Alliances team.
Oh, Nick, it's great to have you. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the importance of vulnerability management. Because for most companies, they're not only managing infrastructure that's on-prem, but they're also managing infrastructure that's in the cloud or even multiple clouds. However, for a lot of us, we're not just working from the office, we're also working from home. So we're dependent on a diverse array of different technologies. And so, this could include devices that are connected to the internet, as well as, the integration of your networks and systems. Nick, based on your experience, how do companies manage risk across the expanding attack surface?
Kind of complex answer here, and hopefully we'll have some time to go through all the different bits and pieces of it. I think it starts first with really getting visibility across your entire attack surface, right? And you mentioned how a lot of us are working from home. We've got our traditional IT networks at the office, but then we have our home networks. There's even things outside of that, right? The move to the cloud is a whole nother network that we need to start looking at. You have your operational technology environments. There's unique asset environments like your Active Directory that you need to be able to look at. So the first thing is really a visibility play. You need to understand what's out there. Once you can understand kind of the entire scope of your environment, you need to be able to assess that. So you need something that can take a look at each one of those different networks. Usually the same tool won't work across all of that, right? Operational technology environments are a good example. You have to be very careful there. You don't want to take down a power plant, right? So you need specialized tooling to be able to assess those particular environments. Once you've assessed the environment, you want to prioritize what you're going to do. You can't fix everything day one, right? That would be perfect if we could. We probably all wouldn't have a job, right? So you need to prioritize. I figure out what I have, then I assess it, and then I need to prioritize what's the most important things to protect in my environment, patch, keep up to date, and so forth. Once I prioritize that, I'm going to go through and remediate. Once I've done the remediation of those things, I need to confirm that they've actually been remediated. And then lastly, I want to measure the efficiency of my program. Am I meeting the goals of my organization from a security perspective? Am I actually reducing the risk? Is there somewhere that I can put operational efficiencies in place to be able to fix more? Do I have full visibility, right? So the last piece is really measuring what you've done, how you've done that, and then process improvement over time, in my opinion. So if you can do all 5 of those, which hopefully we'll get into more detail as we go through, once you can do all of those, I think that's the only way you truly can manage cyber risk. And you got to start somewhere, right? But I think you really have to be able to do all 5 of those if you want to do it efficiently at scale. What about you from your side? What have you seen companies do to help manage their cyber risk?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Nick, on the risk-based management. For customers that I've worked with in the past, there's really been a need for a centralized platform. We need to have the ability to discover these assets across our different environments, because for a lot of companies, they may not even know the sheer amount of cloud-based accounts that their organization is using. So it's a little bit like the Wild West. And so by having that centralized platform, by being able to, go and discover the assets in these different environments, it really helps us take a more risk-based approach for understanding what these assets are used for. And there's also, tools that you can use within your cloud-based platforms like tagging, which gives you the ability to quantify the type of resources that you're managing. But by using that risk-based vulnerability approach, it really gives you the ability to identify mission-critical assets within your production environment and make sure that they're running regular backups.
And that ties back into the prioritization, I would say, right?
Exactly.
The tagging is helpful for visibility, but it's also a key component of the prioritization as you're working through this.
Yep.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, no, it's one of the things that a lot of companies need is not just to understand the cost center that that asset belongs to, but understand what that resource is being used for, whether it's in development, staging, or production. So I think that's a really good place to start. But also once we have visibility into these assets, Nick, how can we best go about determining risk? Whether this be a vulnerability or maybe a system misconfiguration. Especially if you're working in a hybrid environment, you're still supporting legacy workloads. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, it's a very complex question. I think the determination of risk and finding these things really comes down to first, if we can find everything in the environment, not everything's created equal, right? Like my laptop isn't as important as probably our CEO's laptop, purely because he has a different set of access, right? And if you can send an email as him, you could get the company to do all kinds of things. But the risk assessment is about the same across every asset within your environment. We want to go figure out, one, is there vulnerabilities? Those are great to know, right? That's the kind of easy part. But two, is it configured correctly or securely, right? And that could be things from like, is the password forced to be reset every 90 days, right? Do we require complex passwords? Do we block people from logging in after 5 messed up login attempts? So we at Tenable call those misconfigurations or configuration compliance, depending on how you look at it. And I think those are a key pillar of understanding that risk within your environment and truly being able to start to quantify that risk. Because if you're just looking at vulnerabilities or just looking at misconfigurations, you can miss a huge part of the picture. So you really want to make sure you're doing that across the board on all your different asset types. So not just on your laptops, but on your servers, in your cloud. And when I say the cloud, it's not just the EC2 instances in the cloud or the Lambda functions you're running in the cloud, it's the cloud itself. If you do not configure the cloud correctly, it now becomes a vulnerable condition in which somebody could get access to data they shouldn't, right? I think we probably see a lot of open S3 bucket problems in the news, right? Oops, we accidentally left the bucket open and now our data's out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely part of the challenge here is making sure that you have tooling that works across those different assets the way that those assets are designed.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Understanding the type of IAM policies that you're using, making
Yep.
sure that when you're configuring users, if they move to a different project or if they leave the company, that you deactivate their IAM user accounts. Making sure that you're using the concept of least privilege and a defense in depth approach. And vulnerability scanning is definitely part of that, especially with how frequently companies like Microsoft are releasing critical patches and updates to help accommodate the changing threat landscape. So yeah, that's a really good point. And just from a best practices perspective, how would you recommend prioritizing what to remediate first? What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, so prioritization, some of that is going to start with a requirement for each company. The more advanced you get, the more that you're going to have your own thoughts on prioritization, right? You know your assets better than anyone else. You know what's most important to you. So the first place to start, let's say we're starting from scratch. We're brand new into this. We're spinning up a new security program. The first thing to look at for prioritization is just some type of black box scoring. So here at Tenable, we have something called ACR, or Asset Criticality Rating, that tries to put a score to every asset that we find based on the software that's installed, the networks that we see it in. So that gives you a starting point for understanding the value of that asset, right? Or how much should you care about protecting that asset. The other part is putting some type of score onto the vulnerabilities themselves. Because today, almost every vulnerability, you just talked about Microsoft's Patch Tuesdays, right? They're releasing 70, 80, it feels like 100 vulnerabilities every week or every couple weeks, right? And all of those vulnerabilities in general are higher critical vulnerabilities. You can't just go fix all of them right away, right? We already talked through that part. And so what Tenable has done is we've come up with a score for vulnerabilities that we take in the back end of our systems. It's called a vulnerability priority rating. And what we do is we take about 150 different data sources and we generate our own score for those vulnerability based on prevalence. So what are we seeing out in the wild? What are we seeing on the dark web? What are actors actually talking about? Is there an active exploit available for it? Is there a proof of concept exploit? Is it easy to exploit, right? And then how prevalent is it? And we give that score to all of our customers for all of those detections that we have, so that now I have a score on which one of these vulnerabilities is most important. And now that I have a score on assets and I have a score on the vulnerabilities, I have the ability to combine those two scores and say, most likely I should focus on the high VPR, vulnerability priority rating score, on the highest severity assets, right? The most risky assets, my servers that are running, maybe my CRM software or my financial software. And so those scores help you prioritize that way. As you mature, you're going to tweak and tune that to your liking for your organization. Or if you had like compensating controls in place, you may find that certain vulnerabilities, even if they have a high score, you may have a firewall rule in place that says, okay, I don't need to fix that right away. Or maybe you put a firewall rule in place because you can't fix it, right? There's a lot of systems sometimes you just can't upgrade. From I'd love to hear your experience, right? Working at Tenable, we have a lot of solutions for prioritizing. What have you seen out there and how folks are prioritizing these types of things?
No, I like how you're talking about that. Most companies are going to achieve their own internal security baseline, but that baseline will change as the threat landscape evolves. So you're constantly going in there and fine-tuning your policies, making sure that your servers are patched and up to date, making sure that they're appropriately hardened. I know when I used to work with large companies as a security SME, these companies would contact me when dealing with virus outbreaks. And a lot of times they just literally wouldn't know the full breadth of what's in their environment. They may not know their full network topology. Maybe they recently went through an acquisition. Maybe they're in the process of migrating to the cloud. So it's really important to at least have like a framework that you can work off of if you do discover a new server, to make sure that it's running with the correct security configuration, especially when you're dealing with malware.
And that kind of goes back to the assess, right? What you're talking about is like they didn't even know what they had. So they had this unknown risk, really, right, that they were starting with. That's interesting. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought it was interesting.
No, it's really fascinating. And in a lot of ways, it hasn't really even changed even up till now, now that we are having companies working more with cloud-based resources. So I think that, as well as just making sure that you have a centralized SIM within your environment that you can share, the information across other teams, will kind of help give you a little bit more, prioritization from not just identifying these assets, but really determining how you want to go about making sure that they're up to date, or if you don't have the ability to apply that update, what type of stopgap that you can put into place until you can get it upgraded.
Completely agree.
All right, so let's go ahead and think a little bit more on remediation, because for a lot of companies out there, their security teams are wearing multiple hats, and so they could be getting tasked with even more responsibilities and even more resources that they need to support and secure. So, Nick, based off of your experience, how can teams go about remediating these assets once they determine what they need to go about fixing?
We see a lot of customers go through a journey here as well. It's kind of a theme in our conversation here. It's always this journey that folks are going through, right? Remediation is another one of those very long journeys that folks go on. We see, when someone's just starting out, the security team assesses everything. They prioritize it even, potentially, and then they send it over to the IT team, and IT's team's left basically with an Excel spreadsheet from an email, right? And then the next week they get another Excel spreadsheet in an email, and now they're like diffing Excel spreadsheets. What did we fix? What didn't we fix? Right? So remediation is a very key part of the process, right? I wish we could just say everyone just turns on auto update and everything stays up to date. But in the real world, in an organization, it's just not that easy. So people start usually with email and spreadsheets. The next part from there is really trying to find a way to create a repeatable process around remediation. Obviously, the prioritization is a key part of what are we going to remediate, but actually creating the repeatable process for how to remediate, and more importantly, the communication between security and IT is arguably where we see a lot of folks struggle the most. Security team finds it and they just throw it over the fence and they expect IT to just go fix everything, right? But IT can't fix everything. And so they do their best, and then the security team's just over here scanning, kind of just lobbing stuff over the fence, and the IT team's trying to fix stuff as fast as they can, like, hey, we think we fixed it. And so what they end up needing is a tool or a system, a set of workflows to create communication, effective communication between those teams. And there's a bunch of different tooling out there to do it. Think of like ticketing platforms, right? The security team can create a ticket that has all the prioritized information, all the vulnerability information specific for the IT team. If that IT team has all the assets in that same ticketing system, they can get the tickets auto-assigned to the people who would actually work on it, right? If you know who that is and that's in your ticketing platform, that streamlines that part of the approach, right? It's not an Excel spreadsheet that's sent to one person who's got to divvy the work up. Now it's automated. And then once the IT team has that ticket, it's auto-assigned to who it needs to go to. With the ticketing solutions, we have the ability to have the IT team say, okay, I think I fixed this. They can send that ticket right back to the security team, and the security team can do what we call a remediation scan. And it's this very lightweight scan that says for whatever they fixed, it could be 1 CVE, it could be 100 CVEs. But for whatever the IT team said they fixed, we can go double check it. We can do it very fast and very lightweight on the endpoint or the server, whatever it is, to tell you, was it really fixed? Is it gone? Is the vulnerable condition gone, or the misconfiguration for that matter? And if it is gone, we can close the ticket out. Security team sees it closed, the IT team sees their work is completed. But let's say, a lot of patches require a reboot. Let's say for whatever reason the machine hadn't been rebooted, we test it, still a vulnerable condition. We can open the ticket back up, and now both IT and security understand, like, hey, yes, you installed the patch, but maybe you didn't reboot. So they have a feedback loop there from a remediation perspective. And from our side, that's where we see customers actually get the biggest value and time savings, is the ability to streamline the remediation and communication process, right? It's almost a human problem without a tool. That's the biggest piece with remediation, is finding a way to communicate between IT and security where everyone has full visibility and is looking at it the same exact way and can communicate back and forth with it. So usually, right, journey, Excel, an email, and then you end up in a ticketing platform. And over time, that ticketing platform, kind of like the rest of this, it gets quite complex, right? You end up with all these different rules and processes in place, but that's how you can do this at scale very, very well. In my experience, that's what I've seen.
That's really awesome. I know that some companies will actually integrate it into their CI/CD pipeline.
Yep.
For example, Amazon has the EC2 image builder, which you can run periodically to make sure that those patches and updates are getting into your Amazon machine images. But I could see this really complementing that a lot, because it would give you the ability to spin up a server with the latest image and make sure that it's running with current updates, or at least the updates that you have tested up until that point. I know for most companies, they're going to want to test it in staging first before they roll it out to production, obviously, unless you're a really brave soul.
And that's a lot of what we're seeing in the security world, right, with shift left. Right? A lot of folks are trying to move security a lot farther left into that process, make sure those things don't go out at all, or make sure there's a reason for an exception to go out. But I think we see that on the other side in a lot of traditional security with like backups of virtual machines, right? These folks are backing up these virtual machines that may or may not have vulnerabilities on them. And with a unique integration actually between us and Cohesity, you have this ability to scan a backed up machine. So if it's a production server that you can't scan regularly, you can scan backups with them. And you can also confirm So you had some event happen where you need to use the backup. You have the ability to see the vulnerabilities on that machine before you restore it. So you may actually go patch some of those before you restore it. So there's lots of new kind of edge cases coming out in this world about how and when you do remediation and the visibility into those, right? Shifting left or even kind of shifting this weird way to the right a little bit about production environments, because it's just another way to be able to understand and assess those assets in your environment that you didn't have before. Brave new world we're in, for sure.
No, that's really awesome. So Nick, based on your experience, how can we go about quantifying risk so we can present it to other parts of our organization? We may need to present it to leadership or other stakeholders that we work with. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I got a ton of thoughts on this one. This is another one of those big challenges, right? I think there's the industry is getting better and better at taking what is otherwise a very technical problem and turning that into something that is easier for executives or boards to understand. We have a lot of reporting that we've built into our solutions that allow you to do that. But I think the biggest part of the measure, outside of like, yeah, we want to be able to show our executives what's going on, what is our risk, help them understand that, there's always this need to measure how the process is working, how efficiently, more at a technical level, how are our teams doing at remediating vulnerabilities? Are we meeting our goals and our processes? Right? A lot of companies have some type of compliance framework that they have to meet. And being sure that you meet those and you can report on those is very important, because at least once a year, they have somebody come in and audit them. And having the reportability of that is very important. Being able to show that it wasn't just, hey, we did really well the last 3 months when you ran the audit. We actually do really well all the time, I think is also very important, both internally for improving the processes and sharing that up, but also for the audit side to get rid of a lot of the human time that tends to go into measuring how well you're doing whatever framework it is that you're responsible for. We see a lot of companies focused on SLAs. Most of the frameworks have some level of SLA around, if it's a high or medium critical vulns, how fast they need to be patched. A lot of the times those aren't easy to meet. And so you got to start somewhere, right? If you're starting with spreadsheets and email, it's probably, you're not going to meet those SLAs very easily, right? It's just not that easy. But over time, as you improve those processes, you get full workflow, you find where things are slow in your processes or buy new tools that help speed it up. I think the measure here is really in how do I take the process I have and do continual process improvement on it so that one, I can meet the SLAs, and two, I can report up to my executives, to the board, and even my auditors that not only did I do this recently, but I'm always doing it. And that's really where I think measure comes in here. It's the ability to say, here's where we started, here's where we're going, and here's where we think we can improve.
That's awesome. It really seems like the key takeaway here is just making sure that you're continuously monitoring. And using this type of approach, I think it really can help organizations meet, not only meet their SLAs, but also get a better understanding of exposure, even if they're working with dynamic assets within the cloud. Any other thoughts before we wrap up today's episode?
I think the wrap up for me would be, the first thing here, right, to get back to those first 5 bullet points, first thing you need to do is have the visibility across everything. The next is assess all of those different pieces, then prioritize, do the remediation component, and then measure how you're doing so that you can improve over time. Tenable and Cohesity have some unique solutions together to help you with different parts of that, especially on the assess and remediate side for a lot of production workloads. And for the measure component, Tenable has a newer solution, Tenable One, that actually provides a lot of pre-built reporting for executives and helping you understand the risk, as well as it provides some pre-built widgets for understanding how well you're doing your scanning, how quickly are you doing it, are you consistent, and those can help you get a good understanding of where you may be able to have some process improvement along the way.
That's really awesome. I want to thank you, Nick, for taking the time to take us through this really awesome framework that organizations can use for quantifying and understanding vulnerabilities, and also talking a little bit about the new integration with Tenable, that Cohesity CyberScan feature, which you can actually access directly via the Cohesity marketplace, and also you can access it via Tenable as well. So really want to appreciate your time, and I think that's pretty much it on my end, but I want to thank you for your time, and this wraps up another episode of Cohesity Tech Insights. I want to thank everyone for watching.
Thanks, Shelly.